Hello, I'm your instructor, Bernard Norcott-Mahany, and we are going to look at Chapter 11, which deals with Greek heroines. Chapter 13 does as well. If you want to check out Chapter 13. So the main figure in this chapter is going to be the figure of Medea, and Medea is a somewhat unique Greek heroine. So we'll talk about sort of her uniqueness as we go on. So Maurizio basically makes the claim that the things that apply to the heroes also apply to the heroines, and to some extent that's heroes and heroines both are characters who were seen as important and somehow connected to the gods or blessed by the gods, and whose pleasure or displeasure is a concern of the city going forward. So there's a shrine to placate that figure, to keep it happy. So, like heroes, heroines are going to be people who they perform extraordinary deeds that may or may not be moral. This is not entirely the case with heroines. So some heroines, for instance, are connected. There are heroines who are heroes. So these are infants who die in infancy, male infants that they're taking care of, and the infant hero is actually sort of the focus, and they're basically caregivers, and they're not really exceptional as such in doing that. But Medea certainly performs extraordinary deeds, many of which we would not consider moral. They die violently or mysteriously. Depends on the heroine. Some heroines basically are defined by their death. So Antigone, Oedipus's daughter, who goes to her death in order to honor her brother who has died, or Iphigenia, who is good of the Greek fleet. They are both sometimes categorized as brides of death as a type of heroine, and the violence of their death is actually, and the prematureness of their death is key to their being heroines. In other words, they don't become the norm, which would be to become wives and mothers. They're worshipped at grave sites. Again, this is fairly standard. That's where the body is, and that presumably would be where the ghost would come back if you don't placate it. A form of immortality through song and cult. Well, all the characters that we're calling heroes or heroines all are in either plays or poems, and so they're famous, right? There are already songs about it. And so you might say, like, there are songs about characters like Jesse James, that you might say, well, he achieved immortality, and fame through songs, through stories, through movies, sort of a hero, and from became a hero. No, he was an outlaw. That would not be a deal breaker for the Greeks. There are some heroines. Well, one thing is, the heroes might be seen as models for males to emulate, but some of the heroines, especially the more forceful heroines who do the most amazing things, they are not, because they're basically female characters who are doing men's work, and that is not something that the Greek culture wants to sort of emphasize. In other words, the Greeks do not want like Wonder Woman, right? Greek women should not be. Now, it doesn't provide this, but that I used to use, which was also called Classical Mythology, by Harris and Platzner. They look at Greek heroines and they divide them into 5 different types of heroines. So the first type is the wife or the mother of the hero. Now, the wife or the mother of the hero may or may not do anything extraordinary. So Andromache is the wife of Hector, for instance. In a sense, she does something sort of extraordinary in that she endures. So after Troy falls and she is enslaved, she endures that, and then it turns out her Greek master, dies. He ends up with freedom, sort of survives. So she's a survivor, but otherwise she doesn't do anything sort of that might be considered heroic. Is the mother of Hercules, and again, her chief thing is that she's one of Zeus's mates, and she gives birth to the greatest of the heroes. So her fame is sort of reflected from the fame of Hercules. The second type, and that first type is like the model, right? This is the type of heroine that the Greeks would say women should emulate. Good wives and mothers. The helper maiden, these are young women before they're married who help a hero do his. And the point is, they can be helpful up to a point, but if they get too romantically involved with the hero, things usually go bad. And so we've got Medea in her early years. So when Jason first comes to Colchis, he enlists the help of Medea, who would be like a 13 or 14-year-old girl. She, of course, is already a powerful sorceress, and she mixes up a brew which makes him sort of invulnerable. He has to yoke these fire-breathing bulls, and it protects him from being burned up. And as she gives him some advice, comes up with a sleeping dragon that Jason has to get past to get the golden fleece. So, and as long as in that early period, she's basically helping Jason out. Now that's going to change in the later years, because the relationship, first of all, she gets in a relationship, and the relationship sours. And then Ariadne is the daughter of Minos, the king of Crete, and she helps Theseus deal with the Minotaur. But in her case, there's sort of a good and bad side. The bad part is she helps Theseus out. Of course, she has to leave Crete because her father's very upset. And they leave. They land on an island called Sauce. They spend the day there together. They spend the night there together. And when Ariadne wakes up, he sets sail. So he abandons. And she is on the point of despair when Dionysus comes and rescues her. So she ends up actually in a good place, because she is becomes the spouse or the lover, at any rate, of this, and that's a good thing. So there's a resurrection theme there, but she also is abandoned initially. So she helps this guy out, and the guy treats her badly. So the helper maiden, some helper maidens are fine. They do their job. They help the hero out, and then that's it. There's no further thing that they do. There's no further involvement. That's really the highest type of hero that's approved. So basically, women can be wives or mothers of the hero, or the hero impersonator is what Harrison Platzner call it. These are figures like Medea, where she basically is a lot like Achilles. She's not going to take an insult from someone she considers less than her, which would include the king of Corinth, his daughter, and Jason, and she is going to make them pay for the insult to her, right? So it sounds a lot like what Achilles feels in the... So Medea is a hero impersonator, so is Clytemnestra. Clytemnestra basically rules Mycenae while Agamemnon's at the war, so she's basically the king in effect. And then when he returns, Agamemnon, killing your enemy, especially warriors, women are not supposed to do that. And I like to think, when I think of the hero impersonator, I like to think of Lady Macbeth in Shakespeare's play Macbeth. There's a famous scene where she basically calls on these sort of like dark forces in the universe, and she asks them to unsex me now. In other words, I can't afford, Lady Macbeth, I can't afford to remain a woman and be sensitive when I have to do all this stuff. So that's sort of what these figures are like. And they're generally not held up as examples, certainly not examples for women, because Greek men do not want women doing men's jobs. It's okay, who's a goddess, but if women start demanding rights, who knows, they might get them, and then where would we be, right? So the Greek men are very patriarchal, and is a sort of heroic thing, but it's not a model, because the goal for Greek women is to have children. So if they die before they have, they basically fulfill their function as procreative agents, then in a sense they sort of failed in what's their normal job. By the way, I'm not advocating all this. This would be sort of a Greek perspective. So Antigone is an example, and Antigone's name appears to actually be, Sophocles seems to be playing on the idea that she is anti-marriage. She's opposed to, Antigone seems to have that in her name. The name pre-existed before Sophocles picks up the figure. I don't think he created the figure of Antigone, but he certainly makes use of that. And she is engaged to the king's son, but the king has sentenced her to death, buried in a cave, provided there'll be some food there, so she'll basically get through a day, but then after a few days, she'll die of starvation and thirst in this cave, which will be blocked, so she won't be able to get out. She chooses to bury her brother and incur that penalty rather than honor the king's command and then get married to the king's son, right? So here is a case where she is actually making the choice that she is going to die a virgin rather than get married. Iphigenia does the same sort of thing, in that she wittingly enters into the agreement. The best example of Iphigenia that we have, Iphigenia appears in different authors, but in Euripides' play Iphigenia at Aulis, Iphigenia is told that she is going to marry Achilles. She goes to Aulis, which can't sail because Artemis is to let the Greek fleet go to Troy, will not release the fleet until Iphigenia is sacrificed, the eldest child of Agamemnon, the leader of the expedition. To get her there, he has this cover story. When she shows up, she finds out what the true reason is, and initially she panics and tries to run away. But then, when Achilles comes to her aid, Achilles basically is willing to defend her against Agamemnon and as many of the Greek army as want to oppose him. Iphigenia, though, on her own, comes to the decision that the Greek men who are going to Troy, many of them will die, so they are making a sacrifice of their lives for the Greek. As a royal, really should not withhold herself from that, but should share the risk. And then she willingly goes to the sacrifice. So again, both Antigone and Iphigenia, they choose death over marriage. Now, of course, in the Iphigenia at Aulis, she is rescued at the last minute by Artemis, but the point is she doesn't know that when she's getting ready to die. And then the victorious heroine, and Harrison Plasner is sort of squishy on this. I would argue these are heroines who largely are successful but stay within the customary female roles. Ones might qualify, but a lot of the helper maidens end up getting gypped because the hero they help turns on them. But Penelope, Odysseus' wife, would be one example. She him, which is what a wife is supposed to do, and she is as clever as Odysseus in a different way, but ultimately she gets what she wants. And they are together at the end of the book. Spoiler alert. If you've got through this point in your life and you haven't read it or read a summary of the Odyssey, shame on you. You should read it and or at least get a summary of it. And Psyche, who is a made-up character in a story called Cupid and Psyche by a man named Apuleius. Psyche is in love with. She's in a relationship with Cupid, and she has to do these various impossible tasks to win him back. They become estranged, and she has to do all these tasks to win him back, and she does it. She succeeds in doing it, and then she herself is granted immortality so that she and Cupid can be a couple together on Mount Olympus. So she's doing the feminine role. She's she wants her man, and she's true to her man, and she eventually wins. She eventually gets him. To be honest with you, a lot of these men don't know really what what help they are. I will mention a couple of things here. So this is Medea and other heroines. Well, Medea, that's this area here, which is roughly where the Sochi Olympics were held so this would be part of Russia, and today it's on the far side of the Black Sea. For the Greeks, I mean, they know they don't have direct contact with that. So this is about as far as Greeks would be aware of, and most Greeks would never, of course, been there. The other place that should have been mentioned in the Argonaut story would be Iolcus, which is up here, sort of in northern Greece. It's in an area just north of what is, what the ancients called Greece. It's still a Greek-speaking area, and that's where Jason is from. And then Medea with Corinth, where the play Medea takes place, and then Athens, where she flees to after the Medea is over. Greek heroines. Now, the figure of Charilla is an interesting figure. So she is a girl. She is from Delphi. Girl. So she's from a poor family. She may even be an orphan. But there's a big festival, and food is distributed at this festival. She, of course, is poor and therefore hungry, and the king sees this as extremely rude at her. She, of course, is horrified and ashamed, and she goes off and hangs herself. Now, that does not sound like a particularly heroic tale. So her actions are not exemplary, right? Her going to commit suicide is not exemplary. You shouldn't do this. Hey kids, don't do this at home. But she still had the opportunity to bring suffering to Delphi. So the point was, after this death, they didn't even know her name. But then her ghost starts to haunt Delphi, and bad stuff starts happening. And they realize that this girl who was treated roughly by the king has to be placated. Her ghost. That's one of the things. Even your own family, you'd have like an annual thing where you'd go to the graveside and you'd have some sort of like little picnic there, because the idea, as long as the dead person thinks that they're still part of the family, they're going to be enough, and they're not going to haunt or cause trouble. So Charilla does cause trouble, right? Her ghost basically haunts and terrifies the people of Delphi. Until they basically build a shrine to her and then honor her. And then every 8 years, the festival where they would sort of reenact that. So there'd be like a little doll that they would have. And someone would throw the shoe at the doll would then be taken away. They would hang the doll from this tree. It's like over and so this whole ritual where they were sort of reenacting. That would happen every 8 years at Delphi. Children could be worshipped as heroes, often because they died prematurely or violently, like Charilla, right? Charilla's a girl, right? She's 10 years old or something. She's a girl. There's an example here of from a Corinthian sarcophagus, so a marble sarcophagus, showing an infant hero, Opheltes, who is being strangled by a snake while his nurse Hypsipyle watches. So the Hypsipyle also becomes a heroine, but her chief reason for being a heroine is her connection to the infant hero Opheltes. While she's away, a serpent strangles the kid, and she comes back and she's horrified. There's Psamathe and her son Linus. Psamathe, comes basically is pregnant with Linus. Her father is horrified and ashamed because it's not, in an approved marriage, and she actually, to hide the fact that she has this kid, she kills the kid. So both of them are worshipped as heroine and baby hero, okay? Because the gods basically command this to happen. So a shrine is set up to honor both the kid who then died because her father was horrified both at her becoming pregnant and also at what she did to the infant. But the point is you want to avoid the point of these avenging spirits, because they actually come and sort of haunt you and cause trouble. They're somewhat like the Furies. Heroines rarely had their own cult shrine. They shared them with heroes, frequently sons, husbands, or fathers. But there are some that do have their own shrine. Corilla, for instance, does. Independent heroines include the prophetess Sibylla. So there was a female prophetess, and that becomes actually a title that's passed on. Just the poet Sappho, we have, who was a woman. She lived on the island of Lesbos. She wrote very famous, maybe the most famous of the Greek lyric poets. And sadly, Greek lyric poetry, for some reason, didn't get copied down enough, so we only have fragments. We only have quotations and like stanzas. We have a few, we might have maybe 3 or 4 full poems, and then we have, maybe a dozen or more half poems, and then we have single stanzas for maybe a couple dozen more, and then we basically have single lines. So we don't have, much of her poetic output. But she was so famous and so well respected, she was called the 10th Muse. And then there was a woman named Cynisca, she's a woman, but she participates and won. And then they discovered she was a woman, and then the rule, what happened after that was the rule was that athletes had to come naked. So obviously you could see, it's a guy. But the fact that Cynisca did that is something outstanding, and actually something to cheer. And so she also had a shrine. We've had this picture before. We had it in the chapter with Apollo of Asclepius and his daughter Hygeia. I'm not exactly sure is being repeated, but here it is. It's a marble funerary relief from Salonika. Mythology. But she's more like a goddess, so I'm not quite sure why this is here. There are both vertical and horizontal traditions of the adventures of heroine. And as you may remember from chapter 10, vertical means there may be multiple versions of the story, and then you can compare those versions of the story, looking at differences. Or, like you could, in the example that I gave was, there have been several, of course, even editions of Batman's origin, and there are some differences and similarities. So in some versions, the guy who becomes Commissioner Gordon is actually Patrolman Gordon, or even Sergeant Gordon or Lieutenant Gordon, who helped the boy Bruce Wayne. But originally that's not the case. Or in some versions, he's there and he raises the kid as his own son. Later versions do that, earlier versions do not. So vertical tradition, you can compare those and see differences and maybe talk about why there are differences. What points are they trying to make? That would be to take all the story, making some sort of biography of the figure. So we can do that for Medea in both cases. We've got Ovid tells some stories of Medea. We also have Euripides, and who also has a play called Medea. And then there's some other plays about Jason and the Argonauts that tell part of the story of Medea. So you can sort of put together a look at Medea in Corinth and compare those, or Medea at Colchis and compare those. I'll make a few appearances in epic poetry. Now, in the Odyssey, women are actually pretty crucial to the story, and women are portrayed fairly well. They're certainly portrayed as powerful agents and not just as add-ons. In the Iliad, they are definitely subordinate to the men. In the classical period, this is a period from 480 to 330, they were often protagonists in drama, while Greek tragedy and comedy is in the 5th century BC. So from a little before 500 up to just before 400 BCE. So that's the period in Greek were written. And comedy, which deals much more with local issues rather than the sort of sweeping epic themes, women get a larger role, right? Because the household is actually, relationships are where they are. So, for instance, the Trachinian women of Sophocles focuses on Deianira, Hercules' second wife. She's really the main character. Hercules is a character in it, but the main character is on DNA and her concern for the relationship. Euripides devoted a significant number of his plays to women. Euripides, we have more plays by Euripides than by either of the other two tragedians. We have 19 plays. One of them is a satyr play, so we have 18. And we have some quarter play. We have some more of Euripides. Euripides seems to have written around 80 plays, so we have basically a quarter of his total output, which is significant since we have, maybe 6 or 7% of the other guys. The other guys that we only have a few plays out of a larger output. So we got a good representation, and a lot of those plays, women are significant characters. So he, a red figure vase from Italy, actually, around 400 BC, showing Medea riding a chariot pulled by dragons. Her grandfather, the god Helios, and this is interesting because it clearly displays the closing scene from Euripides' play Medea. Now, how did they have a flying chariot? There'd be a box, maybe with dragons painted on it, that would be attached to a crane, which would actually lift off and sort of swing across the stage and then off stage. So a mechanism. It would be clunky by our standards. That was, special effects, state of the art. So here we actually have a vase painting from Italy, 30 years after this play was performed, and it clearly shows that scene. Now, it doesn't show it exactly the way it is in the play. Medea flying away in a chariot pulled by dragons, that's something that seems to be a Euripidean invention for the play. So the fact that we've got that, it indicates that that was the inspiration. Just so you know, so here we've got Medea in the chariot. She's flying away. There's Jason looking on. We think it's Jason at any rate. There is presumably the Medea's nurse, who is also taking care of her. They are dead here lying on the altar. And these winged figure up here are thought, they have horrific faces. They appear to be the Poinai, like avenging angels. Now, different from the play, Medea takes the dead bodies of her sons with her in the chariot. And she does that so that Jason does not get the pleasure of closure by burying his sons. She basically removes that. So we're going to look at a couple of heroines now. So we've got Helen, daughter of Leda and Zeus. So she is a hero in the sense she's a demigod. Her life was defined by abductions. When she was a kid, she was about 6 years old. Theseus kidnaps her so that he can hold on to her until she is 13 or 14, and then he can marry her, and he will have the most beautiful woman as his bride. That turns for Theseus. He goes away. The Spartans attack Athens and take Helen back and enslave Theseus' mother. So it does not turn out well for Theseus or his mom. Of course, the Trojan prince comes and seduces her and gets her to go away with him, Menelaus, king of Sparta. Her beauty is depicted as near the most beautiful woman in the world. After her death, she and Menelaus dwell on the island of the Blessed in the underworld. The islands of the Blessed, the location is always peculiar. Sometimes it's in the Atlantic. Sometimes it's actually part of the underworld. I don't know where it would be. I mean, it would have to be in one of the rivers. But the point is, this is the equivalent of heaven. And the strange, the island of the Blessed is Menelaus is not that great a hero. He's not a great hero. There's no reason he should be getting special treatment except for the fact that he's married to Helen, who is the daughter of Zeus. So he seems to basically get a bye into heaven because of whom he knows rather than who he is. She's worshipped with Menelaus along with her brother, the Dioscuri. So her brothers are Castor and Pollux, or Polydeuces. They're the Dioscuri. And there's a shrine to both of them. She was worshipped independently in Sparta and in Rhodes. And I know nothing about the Rhodes, but of course she did travel to Troy, and she would have stopped in various Greek islands on the way. And Rhodes perhaps was one of them. Here at a red figure crater by the Caivano painter. This is sort of late, right at the end of the classical period. And so there we've got the egg, and there we've got Helen, and this her mother Leda, and this is presumably Tyndareus, her mortal father. The story goes because Zeus came to Leda in the form of a swan, that Leda produced 2 eggs, and out of one egg came Helen and Polydeuces, who are the children and Leda, and in the other egg was Castor and Pollux. Was Castor and Clytemnestra, who were the children of Tyndareus and Leda. So Clytemnestra is Helen's sister, but Leda's mortal husband Tyndareus. She married Agamemnon. She killed him when he returned from the Trojan War. She is then killed by Orestes with the help of Electra. Electra does not directly kill her, although she's much more involved in Euripides' telling of the story than in the other versions, where she basically just gives information to Orestes, who does the whole thing. Clytemnestra then sends the Erinyes, the Furies, to pursue in revenge, and Stea tells the story of her family. A red figure vase where Clytemnestra is rousing the Erinyes, the Furies, to go after is another vase painting that is based on a play. This is the opening of the Eumenides. It starts in Delphi. Orestes wakes up. Apollo tells him to get a move on and go to Hell. The Furies are sleeping in the corner, and the ghost of Clytemnestra comes in, wakes them up, and then they go. They leave the stage going after Orestes. The story is that performance of the play, the Furies were so horrific in their appearance. Now, these Furies don't look bad, but the Furies supposedly were so horrific in their appearance that women in the audience, and we don't know whether women were actually in the audience, but this is the story, that women in the audience who were pregnant went into labor because they were so horrified. And, you know, even though that story seems unlikely, it does make Furies who make up the chorus. They're on the stage at the beginning, but they're basically sleeping, and then they wake up. So there would be a reveal, and it does make some sense that if there's going to be a reveal, you might as well make it a big one. So now with Clytemnestra, I don't know if she fully qualifies in a sense for the hero, in the sense of there being a shrine to her. I don't know of any stories, but she definitely is a hero impersonator. She's definitely doing the job of a hero, is killing her enemies. Hecuba is the queen of Troy, the wife of Priam. In the last book of the Iliad, she sings a lament for her son Hector. By the way, Helen also sings a lament for Hector at the Iliad. In Euripides' plays, she seeks vengeance for her murdered children. She's in of Euripides that survived. She's in the Trojan Women, where she's sort of the main character, sort of providing some comfort to the Trojan women who were all going to be enslaved. And she's the one who tries to convince Menelaus to punish Helen for what Helen has done. And he seems convinced to do so, but as the play moves on, it looks like Helen's beauty and her persuasiveness are winning him back. So the point is, Hecuba appears to win, but in the long run, she's not going to be successful in getting Helen punished. And then out that one of her sons, whom Priam sent to a neighboring king for safekeeping during the Trojan War, was killed by them in hopes of getting on the good side of the Greeks and money. So he was basically killed the kid, but he was still getting money to protect the kid. And Hecuba takes revenge on that king. And her actions are like the Poinai, these vengeful spirits. And in fact, the story is, she became a slave of Odysseus. And Odysseus in Euripides is often portrayed as a rather nasty character. He's not the heroic figure of the Odyssey. And the myth was that she actually changed into a dog and attacked the board. And there was this place called the Cynosema, the dog tomb, that was supposedly a monument to Hecuba, and that presumably would be like a shrine. So she does seem to have achieved heroic status in that sense. Here we've got Priam and Hecuba over here raising their hands as they watch Achilles, who is here in the chariot, dragging around Troy. And of course, they would actually not be at the gate of Troy, they would actually be in the balcony, but obviously in a vase painting, there's a limit to what you can actually do. The female figures, of course, have the skin, the not so. Medea has divine ancestry. Her grandfather was Helios, the sun god. Her mother may have been the goddess Hecate. That's sort of unclear. We don't really get much on her mother. Aeetes is her father, and he's sort of the character that Jason has to deal with. She helps Jason get the golden fleece and helps him escape her father's wrath by killing her brother Apsyrtus. And she does, basically Apsyrtus is killed. Some versions it's Jason. In other versions it's Medea herself who kills her own brother. But then she chops up the body and throws pieces of the body overboard, so that the pieces of his son, so that he can give decent burial to the son, and it allows Jason and Medea to get away. She's associated with witchcraft and magical abilities. Jason exiles Medea so that he can marry the daughter of King Creon. That is actually not what the place is. Creon, the king of Corinth, exiles Medea because he's afraid of her. She's a powerful witch and she's made threats against the royal family. So he has exiled her. Jason says that he actually tried to convince the king not to exile her, but we have no external evidence that he actually did that, and it seems unlikely. Jason wants to marry the princess crown that he should have had things up in Iolcus. So there's no reason to assume that he would have stuck his neck out after she started making threats on the king. In the play, Medea kills both Creon and his daughter, and she also kills her sons by Jason. Jason, at the end of the play, but of course, his chance at a crown is gone. He is going to have to leave Corinth because this whole mess in Corinth is partly due to him. He's depended on Medea all along because Medea basically did all the heavy lifting. She's now leaving him. And with this big scandal on, he might tell about how heroic he was as one of the Argonauts, no one's going to believe. So his reputation's, and he basically, after Corinth, wanders around for a while and eventually finds where the Argo has been beached. By this point, the ship is old and parts of it are rotten. He sleeps on the beach near the ship, dreaming of the good old days, and part of the ship breaks off because it's rotten and hits him in the head and he dies. So that's not a heroic death, and Jason appears not to have had any sort of shrine. So Jason is sort of a hero, but if we look at those five characteristics, he's certainly not a hero that is worshipped. The Corinthians later worshipped Medea's sons as baby heroes, and that is somewhat telling because we need to talk about Medea's sons. First of all, they're not really babies; they're 6-year-old, 5-year-old. I mean, they're old enough. They've got training them, so they're of an age where they'd be going to school. But there are stories of the death of Medea. In one version, Medea is actually beloved by the goddess Hera, who is the patron goddess of Corinth. She is beloved by Hera because Zeus tried to put the moves on Medea, basically rebuffed him without getting killed. So it's a major accomplishment. But that really impressed Hera. And Hera said she would give Medea some reward. Medea's sons go to sleep in the temple of Hera at Corinth, which is the main temple, because Hera is the patron goddess, and they don't wake up; they die in their sleep. Now, to us, that seems like that's not much of a gift, but the ancient Greeks were sort of pessimistic, and so the idea was that life is pain. It's better not, or if you're born, it's better to die soon after that, because once you get past young adulthood, when you're fit and you're having a good time and you're enjoying life, responsibilities and you off, and you basically have a lot of your life which is painful and difficult. So it's better to die, first of all, not to be born, but if you're born, to die soon after. And so that spirit might be behind the kids being taken by Hera. The other version, which seems to be the version, either of these versions seem to be the version that was there before Euripides wrote his play. And the other version is that the Corinthians execute the children of Medea, because they're the ones who take the poisoned gifts to the king and the princess, so that they're not witting accomplices, but they are accomplices. And since the Corinthians kill them, and Euripides does make reference to the vision. Medea, when she's going to kill her kids, he makes to herself is that the Corinthians will certainly kill them, and this way she can do it quicker and therefore less painfully, and therefore it's more merciful if she does it rather than let the Corinthians get their hands on her. So he's aware of that other version. He chooses to have Medea kill her own kids. And her ultimate reason to do it is that is the final nail she can put in Jason's coffin. The last thing of joy in his life she can take away. And she does. So it's, harsher in the play, than otherwise. Because, why didn't she just take the kids with her? She does, and it might have ruined her plans for her escape, but that's not really addressed in the play. What happens to Medea after she kills her kids, or after the kids die, after she leaves Corinth at any rate? She gets to Athens. There she marries the king Aegeus. She has a couple. Aegeus had an older son, Theseus, whom he went to Troezen in southern Greece. There he slept with the daughter of the king of Troezen, and he thought, well, we had sex, so maybe I did get her pregnant, but I don't know, and I got to get back to Athens. He said to her, when the kid comes of age, so when he's 16 or so, I've left a sword and I've left a sword belt here. Give these to the kid, and then he'll come to Athens, and I'll recognize them and recognize my son. So if you happen to have a kid, if it happens to be a son, send him to me when he comes of age. What happens, and he has various adventures on his way. He gets to Athens. Medea knows instantly that this is Theseus, that he is the son of Aegeus, and so she plans on poisoning him. So they're at a banquet, going to basically give him. He actually is convinced the king that this is an enemy and needs to be killed, and so the king actually offers him the poison cup. He doesn't drink it, and he goes to cut the meat, and the sword that he pulls out is Aegeus' sword. Aegeus realizes, this is my son, and then says, don't drink that wine. Well, obviously, Medea can't hang around now, because she was trying to kill his son. So she takes it on the lam, and she eventually finds her way back to Colchis. Now, she earlier could not go to Colchis because her father hated for killing his son and her brother, so she couldn't really go back there. But the king is now dead, and they make Medea the queen, and she basically rules as queen for another 10-15 years period of time. and then she dies, basically of old age. She dies in her sleep. So she doesn't die violently, she doesn't die prematurely, she doesn't die mysteriously. So there are some things, and she basically has committed a series of what we would call crimes and getting away with it. There is no punishment. I mean, she has to take it on the lam, but penalty, other than maybe a guilty conscience, for what she does. She gets away with it. So she's sort of a remarkable figure. And here we've got a red figure vase by the Copenhagen painter, where Medea is putting magical drugs to rejuvenate a ram. Brief thing on this story before we move on to the next slide. After Jason and the Argonauts get the Golden Fleece, they go back to Iolcus, which is the town that Jason is from. His uncle took over the throne. His uncle agreed to give the throne back to Jason if Jason got the Golden Fleece. So Jason gets the fleece. He goes back to claim the throne. The king, in effect, basically refuses. Decides she is going to make the king pay. She's going to make Pelias, who's the king, pay. And the way she does it is she old ram, hobbling around. She cuts the ram up. She puts the pieces in a cauldron. She boils and she puts special herbs, right, which is what you see here. She's tossing the herbs in. And then the pieces come back together, and the ram is young, and the ram jumps out of the cauldron rejuvenated. She does that in front of the daughters of Pelias and convinces them that they could do the same for their father. Now, same thing with Jason's father, him a young man again. So she's done this now a couple of times. The daughters of Pelias have seen it at least once, and they think this is a great idea. So some herbs, but she leaves out some of the magic herbs that you need to actually have the magic work. And so they go up to Dad, they attack him, they cut him up in pieces, they put him in the pot, they put in the herbs that she's given them, which don't include some of the magic herbs. So I don't know, she gives them like parsley or something. And basically they make Dad's soup. So the king is dead, and then Jason and Medea have to take it on the lam. Even though Pelias took the throne, Jason cannot he would become the king by basically killing the old king, and that they can't allow. So the people basically revolt, and Jason has to leave. That's how they end up in Corinth. So this shows that moment where she's basically working her magic on the ram. So the literary text from chapter 11, from the first part, comes from Euripides' play Medea. The selection we have is about a third of the way into the play. Jason comes to see Medea, who has been exiled. So she's already been exiled. She just found out that she's going to be exiled, and then Jason shows up. The two engage in an agon, which is a rhetorical debate. Agon means contest, but she's in Euripides for a debate. By the way, in Euripides' plays, there is almost always an agon. You have two characters who argue a point. In Euripides' lifetime, the big educational movement was rhetorical education, and Euripides seems to have despised it. He seems to have thought that people were basically learning how to put spin on things rather than deal with the truth. And so he does not like these as such, and he sort of shows them up to be sorts of arguments that sound plausible but that are not actually real. And so in this play, Jason basically argues why his marrying the princess is a good idea, and Medea argues the counterposition. After Jason leaves, Aegeus, the Athenian king, comes onto the stage, and he meets with Medea, and they talk. And basically Medea sees Aegeus' plan. Initially, I think she's very upset about exile because she doesn't have anyone she can go to. But Aegeus likes Medea, and so she realizes that, she can flee to Athens after all this stuff blows out in Corinth. And so she's basically grooming Aegeus to be her protector.